It was a busy Saturday morning in September 1972 at San Francisco International Airport. The kind of morning when the entire terminal seemed to hum with energy. Suitcases rolled across polished floors, announcements echoed through the loudspeakers, and lines stretched across the check-in counters as travelers hurried to catch their flights. The smell of jet fuel drifted faintly through the air, mixing with the scent of vending machine coffee and freshly printed boarding passes. Airports had always carried a certain tension, a strange mix of excitement and impatience where hundreds of strangers gathered together for only a brief moment before scattering across the world again. In the United Airlines check-in line, around 20 people stood waiting their turn. Businessmen checked their watches. Families tried to keep their children from wandering too far. A few passengers shifted their weight from one foot to another, glancing anxiously at the departure board. Everyone wanted the same thing, to move forward just a little faster. Third in line stood a man who appeared completely unaffected by the restless energy around him. He wore a black leather jacket over a plain white shirt, dark trousers, and sunglasses that hid most of his expression. In his hand was a gray suitcase containing a few days' worth of clothing and some documents for meetings in Los Angeles. His posture was relaxed, balanced, and perfectly still. He didn't tap his foot, he didn't check his watch, and he didn't sigh with impatience like the others. The man was Bruce Lee. A few people in the line recognized him immediately. His face had become familiar to audiences through the television series The Green Hornet. Quiet whispers passed between travelers. "That's him," someone murmured softly. "Bruce Lee." But Bruce didn't acknowledge the attention. If he heard the whispers, he gave no sign. To him, this was simply another moment in an ordinary day, standing in line at an airport, waiting patiently like everyone else. 7 minutes later, the atmosphere in the terminal shifted slightly. Two large men entered the check-in area, walking with the confident stride of people who expected the world to make space for them. The one in front was especially hard to miss. He was 28 years old, well over 6 feet tall, and weighed around 265 pounds. His arms were enormous, thick with muscle built through years of weight training. The tight white tank top he wore seemed almost too small for his frame, stretched tightly across a massive chest and shoulders. He was an amateur bodybuilder from San Jose, and he had spent the last 6 years building his physique with obsessive dedication. Every morning began with protein shakes and heavy lifting. Every evening ended with another session at the gym. The result was undeniable. His body looked powerful. His arms alone measured more than 20 inches around. But more important than the muscles themselves was the reaction they produced. When a man that large walked into a room, people noticed. They stepped aside without being asked. They gave him space. Over time, the bodybuilder had begun to interpret those reactions as respect. He had never stopped to consider that the response might simply be instinct. In nature, smaller creatures naturally moved aside when something larger approached. It wasn't admiration. It was survival. But from his perspective, the result looked the same. As he approached the check-in line, he noticed immediately that it was long. At least 20 people were waiting. His flight was leaving soon, and he had no intention of standing there for 15 minutes. So he did what he had done many times before. He walked straight toward the front. The first person in line was a middle-aged businessman holding a leather briefcase. The bodybuilder brushed past him with a casual shoulder, and the man instinctively stepped aside without protest. The second person was an older woman with a small carry-on bag. She pulled her luggage closer to her chest and shifted out of the way. The pattern continued. A few people frowned, but none of them spoke up. The bodybuilder was simply too large, too physically imposing. Confrontation wasn't worth the trouble. Then he reached the third person in line. Bruce Lee. Without looking closely, the bodybuilder applied the same tactic he had used on everyone else, a firm shoulder nudge, the silent message that the smaller man should move aside. But Bruce didn't move. He didn't tense his muscles or turn around aggressively. He simply shifted his weight slightly, rotating his body by a few degrees so that the push slid harmlessly past him without affecting his balance at all. The bodybuilder stopped. This was unusual. Normally, people moved immediately. The moment they felt his shoulder, they stepped aside. Bruce Lee remained exactly where he was. "Hey," the bodybuilder said impatiently. "I need to get through." Bruce didn't turn right away. For a moment he continued facing forward, as though considering whether the interruption deserved a response. Then slowly, deliberately, he turned his head. He removed his sunglasses and folded them carefully into his jacket pocket. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and level. "The line is for everyone." There was no anger in his tone. No challenge. It sounded less like a warning and more like a simple statement of fact. "Wait your turn." The bodybuilder blinked in disbelief. He had expected several possible reactions: nervous laughter, an apology, maybe a quick step to the side. He had not expected refusal. "Buddy," he said, his voice carrying the patient condescension of someone explaining an obvious truth. "I'm twice your size. Move, or I'll move you." Bruce didn't raise his voice. He didn't change his posture. He simply said one word. "Try." The tension in the air became noticeable immediately. Several people in line glanced at each other nervously. Before the situation could escalate, the airline employee at the counter spoke up. "Gentlemen, please," she said firmly. "Everyone will be served in order." The bodybuilder gave Bruce an annoyed look but stepped back into the line behind him. For the moment, the confrontation ended. But the irritation remained. A few minutes later Bruce reached the counter and placed his gray suitcase on the scale. While he was speaking with the airline agent, something happened that would later be described in two very different ways. One version called it an accident. In a crowded space, a large man shifted his foot awkwardly and bumped into a suitcase sitting on the floor. The other version told a slightly different story. In that version, the bodybuilder deliberately drove his foot into the side of Bruce's suitcase. The suitcase slid off the scale and skidded across the polished floor. The clasp, which had not been fully latched, popped open instantly. Clothes spilled out. Two neatly folded shirts. A pair of training trousers. Several personal items. For a moment, the terminal fell silent. Then the bodybuilder laughed. It wasn't a quiet chuckle. It was loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Look at the little Chinese guy picking up his garbage," he said to his companion. A few people looked away uncomfortably. Bruce Lee didn't respond. He simply knelt down on the floor and began collecting his belongings. Each movement was slow and precise. He picked up one shirt and folded it carefully before placing it back inside the suitcase. Then the second shirt. Then the trousers. The bodybuilder's laughter continued for a moment but gradually faded. Something about Bruce's complete lack of reaction made the situation strangely uncomfortable. When everything was packed again, Bruce closed the suitcase with a firm click and stood up. Then he turned to face the bodybuilder. "You're going to apologize," Bruce said calmly, "or I'm going to demonstrate why size without skill is just dead weight." The bodybuilder smirked. From his perspective, the situation still seemed simple. The smaller man had become irritated and was trying to save face. He stepped forward and extended his hand, aiming to shove Bruce in the chest. The hand never reached its target. Bruce's left hand intercepted the arm and redirected it smoothly to the side. At the same instant, his right leg exploded into motion. The sidekick traveled from chamber to impact so quickly that several witnesses later said they barely saw it happen. The heel struck the bodybuilder directly in the solar plexus. The effect was immediate. All the air blasted from the man's lungs in a violent gasp. His body folded forward involuntarily. Before he could recover, Bruce swept the man's support leg with perfect timing. 265 pounds of muscle collapsed onto the airport floor with a thunderous impact. The entire exchange lasted less than 5 seconds. The bodybuilder lay there gasping for breath, unable to inhale properly as his diaphragm spasmed. Bruce didn't follow him to the ground. He didn't threaten him or say another word. Instead, he turned calmly back to the airline counter. "Excuse the interruption," he said politely to the agent. My bag is within the weight limit. The woman stared at him for a moment, clearly stunned. Yes, she finally managed. 42 pounds. She printed the boarding pass and handed it to him. Bruce accepted it with a nod, picked up his suitcase, and walked toward the seating area with the same quiet calm he had displayed from the beginning. Behind him, the bodybuilder slowly regained the ability to breathe. For 6 years he had believed that size meant power. In 5 seconds, that belief had been shattered. And the lesson would stay with him for the rest of his life.